Hey, I'm Pastor Justin with another Snapshots from the Bible. A little show and tell today. We always like show and tell. I want to show you the oldest Bible I own, and that is this right here. Uh, that is this. It is a Holy Bible, according to my introduction here, that was presented to me by my grandparents in 1980. To Justin Alvetti from Grandpa and Grandma, Christmas 1980. And so I got this Bible back in 1980. I really liked it. I carried it to church every Sunday. The reason why I liked it is when I was a kid, I liked the fact that there were pictures in it. In fact, I felt like these illustrations are some of the best I've ever seen in a Bible. Just very beautiful, very poignant. Of course, here's Jesus at his trial. I mean, for 1980, that's pretty good, right? So I carried this Bible around. I made little notes in it. I've got this is one I always laugh about. I say I circled New Testament. And I said that's the good one. That's the good one, not the Old Testament. I did. I forget where it was, but one of these books, I started circling the word God, and I quickly ran out of room for it. But one thing that you'll notice is that, like a lot of Bibles that were given out in 1980, this is a King James version. And that's actually what I grew up with. I grew up with the King James Version, made the transition to the New King James Version sometime in the early 90s. And then after that, especially as our church transitioned to the NIV, got used to the NIV. And then finally, these days, I'm more into the ESV, uh, the, the English Standard Version, or as we like to joke in Calvinist circles, the Elect Standard Version. So a lot of times people ask me questions about translations of the Bible. Which ones are okay to read? Which ones should we trust? The answer usually is whatever version of the Bible that you like to read is a good version for you to read. As long as it's not, there are exceptions. There are ones that are they paraphrase way too much. They're actually not translated at all. I would not, for instance, recommend the Passion Project Bible. That one is very much off the deep end in terms of just adding on to scripture and adding things that were not there in the original text. But I mean, we could go really deep into different translations and how they translate the Bible. But what I wanted to talk today is just specifically about the KJV, because a lot of people have questions about it. Especially as churches get away from the King James Version, there are some churches that very much only promote it. It's called the King James Version only movement or the KJV only crowd. There's a lady at a supermarket I go to who often has a bumper sticker that says, King James Version, all other versions are perversions. I always get a laugh out of that. Not really sure why they have such a chip on their shoulder about saying the King James Version is not just a good version of the Bible, but the only version. And so if you ever get into a conversation or quite likely an argument with somebody about the KJV who is from that camp, they will be quoting to you the beauty of the scripture, the history, the just all these things that where they're appealing to tradition, appealing to history, appealing to the beauty of the text. And you know what? I won't deny a lot of that. The KJV is a very beautiful version of the Bible. That language has a weight to it, and it's really cool to hear it, especially if you hear somebody like reading the Psalms out of the KJV. It's really pretty. But at the same time, why don't we use the King James Version that much anymore? Why is it starting to fall out of favor? Well, because the King James Version was written in 1611. This is a very old version of the Bible. This was written when the when Shakespeare was writing his plays, right? We don't talk the way Shakespeare does, and we certainly don't talk and understand and read text the way the King James Version does. God did not write the Bible in Elizabethan English. He didn't. The Bible was written in Greek and Hebrew and a little bit of Aramaic, and that's the original version. Unless you read those versions of the Bible, you are reading a translation. And translations should be brought into our language so that they are understandable. So this brings up a point. If you ever get into a conversation with King James Version only crowd, um, it's usually not recommended to get into the weeds about it, but simply to appeal for clarity. Because the King James Version uses a lot of ancient words that we don't use anymore. And they also use words that we do use, but it uses them in completely different ways because language changes over time. English changes over time. I was watching a really good YouTube series on the King James Version, and this guy he's a expert in the field. Certainly loves the King James Version, and does it did not come out with these videos to just sink it, but rather said what you need to understand was when it was originally written, uh, the way everybody spoke and understood English and the way it was written were very close together. But as time goes on, these versions of English drift apart to the point where they're almost becoming separate languages. So, yes, we can understand with a great difficulty with word translation lists what some of these words are, like besom. Do you know what besom is? Because it's in the King James Version. It's tumor. You would rather have somebody say tumor than besom. So there's a lot of these words, and that's what the New King James Version was attempting to accomplish, is to bring it up to a more modern language. But the verse I want to point out today is 1 Corinthians 14:33, where Paul is talking about worship, and he says, "Our God is not a God of confusion, but a God of peace," or a God of clarity. And I think that's really important when we're looking at versions of the Bible and picking ones that we want to read and we want to use. We need versions that are clear so that we can read them and understand. God is not looking to confuse us the way He's given us the Bible. He's given us a Bible that's easy to read, that's easy to understand, that in its language, kids are able to read and understand it. It's not just for very elite academic types. It's for all people. And if a version of the Bible, if a translation starts to become unclear, starts to become confusing, then maybe we need to not rely on it so much anymore. Now, I'm certainly not saying stop reading the King James Version. It is a great version of the Bible. In fact, if I was to create a list of 5 translations of the Bible that I would recommend to people, King James Version would be on it. Because I think there's a beauty to the language, there's a power to the language. They did incredibly awesome work on this translation of the Bible back in the day. But we're also talking about 400 years ago. There's been a lot of work in the field of translation since then, and the language has been updated radically since then. And that's why I usually encourage people to check out the English Standard Version, because it really is a middle ground between the King James Version and the NIV. It's got a lot of the more readable English, but it still carries a lot of the accuracy, the form factor that the King James Version has. So it has a lot of that weight and beauty to it as well. But you read the NLT, you read the NASB, you read the CSB, whatever version of the Bible that you find speaks to you the most, brings you the closest to Christ, without really sacrificing the truth of Scripture, is the version you should be reading. And if that's the King James Version, well, I grew up with it too, and look at where I am today. So it doesn't ruin you or anything like that. So I just want to encourage you to consider versions of the Bible that are clear, because our God, 1 Corinthians 14:33, our God is not a God of confusion, and we should not be confused reading the Bible. God bless. Have a great day.